Surviving single parenthood. Very important topic. Why? Why is this an important topic? Well, there's a number of reasons why it's important, but I want to talk about it from the perspective of how we survive it as men. How do we survive it? Because there are boys and there are males who have not survived it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So surviving single parenthood. Now, the first thing that we've got to understand is that single parenthood is something that, first of all, comes from actually an energy source. Everything comes from energy. Everything comes from energy. But preceding energy is always principles. Principles. You look at some of my other videos, talk about principles. But energy, which comes from principle, is the energy that brings forth two basic energy resources, or actually their sources, and that is the feminine source and the masculine source. These are energy sources. Okay, they're energy sources that it's important to understand that they are not the same. They are totally and 100% separate of each other. There's not a little bit of masculine and feminine and vice versa. No. If that was the case, both would not be necessary, but both are necessary. So it's important to understand that there's a masculine energy and that there is a feminine energy. Now, here at the Masculinity Man Cave, we're going to talk about from the masculine piece. We're going to also eventually go to the feminine salon, and we're going to talk about some of that as we go to later on. Okay, so let's talk about what masculine is. Masculine is not gender. And you'll see I say this time and time again, over and over again in my videos, that masculine is not gender. And see, what we've made it to be gender, and it is a mistake. It's not saying that we're dumb or anything like that. We make mistakes, we make errors. It's part of the human element. So it's important to understand that masculine is not a gender, but it is a function, right? It is a function. It is an operation. Masculine causes a specific operation and function. It doesn't even cause us, but it causes all things that have masculine energy to operate in that fashion, to operate and to function in that fashion. Now, there are people, I've been talking to some folks about the whole idea of how things operate differently as masculine and feminine. Because we have a mindset that masculine and feminine are gender, and they're not. And it's important to understand that they're not. Masculine and feminine identifies the way it operates, it functions, it moves. Okay? It doesn't identify sex. It doesn't identify gender. To understand energy a little better, energy is the source. It is what gives life, activity, operation, lawfulness, and legality. Energy is the power source. It is the power source. Okay? So it's important to understand that this power source has both a feminine and a masculine source. Okay, so it's important that it's masculine for us, because what we're talking about here in the Masculinity Man Cave is basically how to understand masculinity. But masculine is not masculinity. Masculine is operational and functional, right? I say it again, it is not gender. It is operational and it is function. Okay, so now if to understand masculine and to understand that masculine has a transfer from being masculine to masculinity, and feminine has to transfer from feminine to femininity. Now, everything has to be done legally. Everything has to be done right. Everything has to be done lawfully. If it's not, then what would happen is there would be total chaos. There would be total eradication and destruction. But when lawfulness and legality are in place, things operate as they were designed to operate and to function. So when it comes to masculine coming into this sphere that we call earth, in this sphere we call life, in this domain that we call earth, atmosphere, in which we live, move, and we are alive in. Okay? Masculine has to come into this particular sphere, but it can only do it rightfully. It can only do it lawfully and legally. How does it do that? How does it do that? Well, masculine drops the E, at the end of the word. masculine. Drop the E and add I, the suffix ity. And it becomes masculinity. Now, why does it transfer? Why does it do it? Well, because once it's identified as masculine, it's identified as operation and function. But when it comes into this sphere, it carries operation and function, but it does it in a different way. It does it in accordance with the ity, which is the suffix, which means degree. It means not just degree, it means the science of, it means order, it means chronology, it means the proper order, the proper sequence. That's the word I'm looking for. Proper sequence. Okay. When the E is dropped, see, the E gives it power, legality, and energy. But once it drops the E and puts on the ity, it gives it science. It gives it order, chronology. It gives it sequence. It gives us a system. And so masculinity is a system of masculine. Okay? And it's identified, and it is identified in this realm through our design. Masculinity has a design. And that design is meant to point back to masculine as being the mode of operation and function. And that design is also carried out in our body. And so if you look at the masculinity in your body, it is definitely different than femininity. Femininity and masculinity are diametrically opposite of one another. In masculinity, in our body, we see it in our genitals. We see it because it does what masculine does. Now, what does masculine do? Well, I didn't tell you, but if you look at some of my other films or the videos, you'll see that masculine, it initiates, it pierces, it inserts, it injects, right? And so, and not only does it pierce, and not only does it inject, not only does it insert, not only does it initiate, okay? It goes through, it initiates it, and that same thing can be seen in the masculinity body, in our design as a masculine entity in this sphere. In our genital areas is used as a type and shadow of what masculinity is to do. Now, it's not only about sex, it's about what we do with our mind, bodies, and souls. This is what masculinity masculinity does. It brings the science of order, sequence, of piercing, of penetrating, of insertion, injection, and initiation. This is what we do. This is what masculinity does in every area of life. And no matter what you look at, if it inserts, if it pierces, if it injects, if it initiates, it is of a masculine energy. Masculine energy is not just for individuals, the masculine entity as individuals. It's for everything that does and follows that function and operation that I just mentioned. Those 5 functions, that 5 operations. So it's important that we understand that masculinity brings the science and gives order and sequence to masculine. that same sequence is also indicative in our design. It's indicative in our design. Look at the way that the masculinity is built. To initiate, to insert, to inject, not just the genital areas, but if you would look at the shoulders and the feet and the thighs and the abdomen, all these things, that the design of the masculinity body is totally fit for and to demonstrate masculine energy. It's important for us to understand that. And so it's the same way with feminine energy, but we're going to talk about that later on another video. Now, again, we understand that femininity and masculinity, especially masculinity, because that's what we're talking about, drops the E and adds the ITY, which we've already shown that it indicates the science of masculinity. Now, who does this masculinity? Well, who does masculine? Who does masculinity? Who determines it? Who determines it? Now, we've got to understand a thing cannot define itself. It can't. I don't care. Toyota cannot identify itself. Camry cannot identify itself as a Camry. It can identify itself. Someone gave it the name Camry, right? And that was Toyota, the maker. So the maker of the thing is the only one that can define the thing. The thing cannot define itself. So the masculinity that has been defined by the maker, the maker of not only the masculine, not only the energy, but is the source of it all. And we would call that the universe or God or great spirit or whatever you want to call it. The great scientist, the master scientist, however you want to call it, there is a source, and the source is the one that determines and defines what masculinity is, right? So it's important that we understand that piece. Now, not only that a thing can't define itself, but a thing is to be fulfilled first in the mind of the maker of. So you are not an accident. You are very much intentional. Your life is not your own, but it is intended for you to bring something to better this place, this atmosphere, this domain that we call Earth. But that idea of your fulfillment was already in the mind of the maker. It's the same thing with the Toyota. Toyota had in mind what would be the fulfillment of the Camry, right? And the fulfillment of the Camry is to whatever the Toyota decides it's going to be, because it's going to be different from any other Toyota. So it's important to understand that a thing its fulfillment comes from the mind of the maker of it and not from the thing itself. Okay? So let's look at that. Next, let's talk about the importance. What is the importance? Why is masculinity important? Because with what we're seeing now in our community, culture, and clan, we're seeing the belittlement of masculinity. There is an attempt to make masculinity of non-effect and void it. But what I want to share with you is the importance of it. Okay, I want to share with you the importance of it and why we need it. Now, the first thing is masculinity can only function and operate in masculinity. You can't have masculinity in femininity, nor can you have femininity in masculinity. Like reproduces like. Like, I'll say that again, like reproduces like. It is not a matter of what you feel or think. It is what the universe has determined to be so. Okay? It's what the universe has determined to be so. Just like masculinity can only be function and operate in masculinity, Femininity can only function and operate in femininity. It cannot do operate the other way. Now, what we also need to understand is that masculinity needs femininity. It needs it because it only holds that masculinity piece. It does not hold the femininity piece, and vice versa. Femininity needs masculinity because femininity only holds femininity and does not hold masculinity. But what we're seeing here now is people think that the two are in each other. No, they're not. If that was the case, they wouldn't need each other. They wouldn't need each other, but they do need each other. And they need each other because of the fact that one is totally masculine and the other is totally feminine. So that now, what happens then when we see people who think that their design speaks of one, but they think that there's something else? What we call this femininity and masculinity traits. See, what happens is people have a tendency to grab upon traits. Well, let's try to identify what a trait is. A trait is something that basically is the characteristic of a thing. Okay, it's the characteristic. It is the carrying out. It is mental. It is behavioral. Okay, and what it does is it acts out in a certain operation or certain tendencies. Basically, it's more of tendencies. Now, we talked about essence before. Essence is the founding source of everything. Everything comes essence. And the closest thing that we can identify essence to is what we call spirit. Our essence is that intangibleness of us. Okay? See, that intangibleness of us is what causes us to be able to have the masculine or feminine essence that we have. That is also indicated in our design. You're not a mistake. The universe did not make a mistake. The universe never makes mistakes. Because there's an idea as to why you're here and what you're supposed to bring. That cannot be mistaken. The only mistake is that we've made a mistake as to understanding the difference between what essence is and what traits are. So let's look at the difference between essences and traits. Essence is the intangible. It's the quality. It is the core, the spiritual essence of who we are in truth, who we are in legality, and we are in every area of that which is untouchable, but is totally the intention and idea of the maker. That is imprinted, the idea, the intention of the maker is imprinted in our essence. So you're not a mistake. And so now when your essence is represented in your feminine or masculine nature, okay? And once your feminine and masculine nature, feminine or masculine nature has been given, then you are also given and come into this sphere and put on masculinity, and you're given a design, and that design is a masculine design that is a masculinity design that points back to the masculine, and it is your design is a type and shadow of that masculine. Now, what happens with some folks, they reject that essence. They reject that which they have been told or designed to be. And they feel like they don't want that. They feel like it's not what they're supposed to be. And so what they do is they go out and they learn through community, culture, and clan. They learn traits. They learn traits. Now, what are traits? We talked about it already. We talked about what traits are. Traits are habits, are ways of people imitating that which they want to gain. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about cultural and trait appropriation, the difference. We see people culturally appropriate other cultures' habits, mannerisms, and behaviors, language, et cetera, et cetera. We see it all the time. It's the same thing. Trait appropriation is the same thing. But it's done on a gender level as opposed to a cultural level. Okay, we see cultural appropriation, and cultural appropriation happens first through observation. When a person sees and they observe certain cultural behaviors, then they through their observation they begin to accept, which is the second piece. They begin to accept those cultural things that they see, and they say, well, look, I want that. I want to accommodate that. I want to appropriate that. And so they do that by accepting it. They accept it. And once they accept it, they begin to rehearse. They continue rehearsal and rehearse those same, whether it's language, dress, whatever you want, behavior, whatever you want to, whatever it is appropriated via culture. And so that is what cultural appropriation, how it takes place. Well, trait appropriation comes similarly the same way. It is the same thing. Like, let me use this example. Let's say that we were to go out. This is how we go about trait appropriation. Let's say I was to go out and buy a suit. Okay. Now I'm in the clothing store and I'm walking around. This is what we do when we trait appropriate. When we go about our daily lives and we see someone or we see something that catches our eye. This is observation, just like we talked about in cultural appropriation. Something catches our eye, right? And this suit or this article of clothing catches our eye. And the next thing we do is we pick it up and we imagine ourselves in it. We look at it and we look at it if it's our style, oh yeah, I like this. And so what we do is it's like we do when we culturally appropriate, we begin to accept some things. We begin to accept things relative to how it fits, how it looks, right? How we think about it. So what do? As we look at it, next thing we do is we try it on. We try it on, and that is when we accept it. We're accepting it when we try on traits that are different from who we are, really designed to be. You were not designed to receive, sir. You were designed to initiate, to inject, and to insert. You were not intended to receive. That is a quality of femininity. To receive, to incubate. Okay? Those are qualities of femininity, not masculinity. So when we see this suit and we try it on, and we look at it, where do we look at it? In the mirror. We look at the mirror, and the mirror gives us a view of how this particular thing looks on us, right? And this mirroring is a type of rehearsal. It's a type of rehearsing what it's going to look like when we go out and about, because we're mirroring what we've seen in the mirror, and the mirror is someone else, another one that holds those particular traits. And so we mirror those traits. We rehearse those traits. And then what do? With that suit, after we looked at it in the mirror, what do? We purchase it. And purchasing it is appropriation. That's how we go. That's how trait appropriation takes place. And this is what's happening now. People are appropriating traits. And this is how you can understand how traits are not and energies are separate. See, energy gives you authenticity. Energy gives you authenticity. What traits do is it gives you exaggeration. Because it's not authentic. It's something that we've picked up. And anything that we've picked up is not going to be authentic. That's important for us to know. Traits are educational. They're learned behavior. Whereas energy is based on principles and on our essence. It's authentic. Traits are not. So it's important to understand that people who appropriate are not being authentic. They're not being authentic. Now let's talk about the whole idea of masculine raised by feminine. Masculinity being raised by femininity. Now, what happens what you've got to understand is This is what happens in single parent homes. When masculinity is raised by femininity, what eventually is going to happen, and I don't care how much the mother is going to punch you in your chest or treat you like a man, she cannot, because she is not masculine. She does not have masculinity. She is a femininity entity. So automatically you're going to receive a femininity mentality. It will transpire, or it will transfer, is the word I'm looking for. It will transfer to you a femininity mentality. Next, feminine habits. You can tell that some masculinity entities have been indoctrinated with femininity habits. You can see in the way that they carry themselves. You can see the habits, the gestures, the way that they talk. You can see very blatantly that there are some femininity qualities and habits about them. And then lastly, femininity in their language, the words they choose, how they articulate, okay, how they communicate has a feminine essence to it and lacks masculinity. So this is what masculinity raised by femininity will result in: feminine habits, feminine language, and feminine mentality. Now, I real briefly, what happens when femininity is raised by masculinity? What happens? And I want to say this real quick because I feel a need that it needs to be addressed. When feminine, let's say the single parent home where the young lady or the female is being raised by masculinity, what's going to happen is masculinity traits are going to eventually evolve. Why? Because she's exposed to those things. And again, as a result of that, exaggerated masculine traits, learned behavior, just like with the masculinity that's raised by femininity. The next thing is there's going to be aggressive behavior and language. When you hear a lot of this language, this salty language from females, that is a trait. She's accommodated a trait. Women don't use that kind of language. Females do. And females have accommodated, right? They have accommodated that through traits. The next thing is that happens when that can be identified when femininity is raised by masculinity is that competitiveness. Competitiveness it becomes a much, and so she becomes competitive like a boy. She competes about everything. Women don't compete. Men compete. Boys compete and males compete. Not women. But females who have been raised in a masculine environment, they will compete. The next thing is that they will be violent. They will be given over more to violence in a much readily way because of their aggressive behavior and their aggressive language. That female who cusses every other word is masculine in her traits. And she may look good, she may be attractive, but believe me, your two masculine entities cannot coexist. And because she's exaggerated in her masculine traits, she's going to try to outman you. She will try to outman you and show you what a man is supposed to be and tell you what a man is supposed to be. How are you going to tell a man what a man when you're not a man? How can femininity tell masculinity how it's supposed to act? It can't. And so we have all these content creators who are females trying to tell men how they're supposed to act, or telling women how men think and this, that. No. What you're supposed to be doing is telling females how they're supposed to act toward the masculine energy. You can't tell us. You can't. Period. The next thing is that femininity raised by masculinity does is it uses enforcement. I'm trying to get my words together. Enforce. It uses enforcement. It uses force not to not to just come and agree or whatever. It wants to force its way. That's what masculinity does. So it's important that you understand that these femininity entities that's raised by masculinity is going to challenge your masculinity. It's going to happen. Not might. It will happen because that's the way she's been raised and the traits that she has. And you hear these females talking about they will become feminine when they find a man that is worthy. That's not going to happen. That will never happen because she doesn't know to be feminine. She can't be because she wasn't raised. You can't be something that you weren't raised to be. If you weren't raised feminine, then for you to be able to put on femininity is not a possibility. It's not a possibility. Not unless some changes have to take place. Now, let's talk about real briefly. Let's talk about, I'm looking at the clock, some of the dangers of living in a single parent home from a general perspective. Some dangers that of living in a single parent home. Okay, the first thing is, we've just finished talking about it, gender trait appropriation. Next is gender role confusion and rejection. They're going to be confused about who they are, and they will reject who they are in their design, depending on who they have spent most of their time under the influence of. Right? So if a masculine entity or a boy has spent most of his time under a feminine or his mother, what's going to eventually happen? He's going to have gender role confusion about what it means to be a boy, a male, and even to the point of rejecting it because of his mother's experiences with the male gender. Well, let's say that there's no problem in the home. Okay. What else can single parent? Because there's some people say, I was raised, I had no problem. My mother raised and did a good job raising me. Okay, fine. But what you have to also understand is that culture influences us well. When you go out into your society, into your neighborhood, into your community, to your culture, into your clan, out there, they influence you. They influence how you, and that's why it's important that you have someone in the home that can identify those cultural influences from a gender perspective to help disciple, discipline, and to train and help make decisions relative to what is and what isn't appropriate from a cultural perspective, what is and what isn't appropriate from a gender trait perspective, and to identify what is and what isn't proper from a role perspective. Just like a boy needs his father, a girl needs her mother. Okay. Now, let's talk about the advantages of single parent home or parenthood, because there are people saying there are advantages, and they're saying, well, there's the ability to make decisions. You don't have to worry about asking or clearing anything, or you can make decisions all by yourself. Well, what about if your decision is not a good one? What if it's not a good one? You need someone, and maybe it is a good one, but it may not be a good one all the time. So it becomes important to understand that, some people think that that's an advantage. Another thing that they think is an advantage is independence. You don't have to ask anybody for permission. You don't have to do it. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want to. And so that becomes to some an advantage. And then also an advantage in single parenthood is the whole idea of friendships. Friendships become more important than anything else. But what we fail to understand is friendships also become influences. They become influences. And those can be positive, but can also be negative. Okay? And so it's important to understand that. And the next thing is bonding with kids. They say, oh, We can, I don't have a problem with bonding. It's an advantage. I can bond with my children. There's no problem. We just bond together. It's almost like we're brothers and sisters. That relationship should never be that way. You should never bond with your children like that. Your bonding with your children should always be on a parental level and nothing more. You're not friends. We're family. Okay. The next advantage people say is finances, because hey, I can spend my money whenever and however I want. And so they do. And hey, there's no getting around that. That could possibly be, but I mean, some people, even though you have freedom in finances, may not be enough finances to do everything that you would like to do. And then the last advantage some people say is that, I don't have to split my attention. I have undivided attention on my children. I don't have to give it to someone else and the children. I can have it all to myself. I've heard it. Okay, so here's some things that I think that's important, and we're going to get ready to close. That I think it's why the corresponding gender is very important. The corresponding gender to your son is important. The corresponding gender is not a stepfather. The corresponding gender is his father, because he's like his father. He's the likeness of his father. So like is formed in likeness. Okay? The likeness is formed in the like. In other words, the son is formed in the image, in the likeness of his father. Also, the son is fashioned in the likeness of his father, which means he has certain ways about it. You've seen it. You've seen it. You've seen how your son acts, points, talks. He's fashioned after his father, and you see his father in him. And some mothers detest that. They detest that not only is he formed, he's built like his father, but that he's fashioned. There's mannerisms. There's certain things, qualities about that son that reminds her of the father, and that may be a good thing, and sometimes it may not. And then the thing is this, that likeness imitates like. In other words, the son imitates his father. The more that he has access and is around his father, he imitates his father. Eventually, he'll be able to differentiate between those things that he's going to hold on to and those things that he won't. Just like a girl would do with her mother. Okay, but he imitates him till he comes to a place of understanding on his own to be able to cognitively make some choices. The next thing is that the child draws closer to the corresponding gender. Why? Because they see the similarities, they see the fashioning, they see the forming, they see the imitation, and so there's an innate ability to draw closer to one another. Okay, and then the last thing is that the father mentors the son. That father should be mentoring his son. If he's not mentoring his son, he's not being a father. Now, the whole premise of this video is to give you some keys to survival of single parenthood as a male, as a man, as a boy. How can you survive? Well, the first thing that needs to happen is you've got to be able to define gender roles. There's two gender roles. There's masculinity and femininity. And there are people going to say that they're more. And then there's some people, because we say that they're binary, but there are people who say they're non-binary. They're saying that they're non-binary. There is only two. Everything in the universe is binary. Hot, cold is binary. masculine, feminine, binary, yin, yang, binary. Everything is binary. Day, night, binary, right? So we've got to understand and define what gender roles are. And how do we do that? Well, we do that. Our parents help us with that. Parents who have been reared by parents are able to show and define what gender roles are. The other thing is that through their performance of gender roles, we identify gender roles by how they perform. How a boy finds out how masculinity operates by watching his father, how his father performs. And then how does he do it? He participates. He participates in that type of performance. He goes to the bathroom. He stands at the toilet. He takes care. He goes to the bathroom, right? He does the same thing that his father does, right? He imitates his father in the way he eats and how the things and how he does all these things as he identifies gender roles, and then he participates in them. The next thing that has to happen is that in order for us to survive gender single parent home is we've got to learn to embrace our gender roles. There needs to be some pride and practice in us embracing our gender. And this is the problem. We've been in some homes we've been raised to disavow our gender role. We've been taught the opposite of our gender role. And as a result of that, we have confusion. So we have to embrace our gender roles. We have to take pride in being masculine and practice being masculine. Practicing in the way we talk and the way we walk, the way we dress. Not from a trait standpoint, but that we've been taught. We've been discipled. We've been mentored by our fathers on how we are to be in this role called masculinity. The next thing is not only pride in our gender role, not only practice, but also to promote it. We have to promote masculinity. And this is the problem that we're having now. We are not promoting masculinity. Whereas femininity or feminism is being promulgated with a vengeance in our community, culture, and clan. But we've got to promote masculinity. We've got to promote it. And until we do that, we're going to continue to have the problems that we are. Why is gender roles important? Why? Why are they important? Well, because they promote the importance of gender roles is that it's the promotion of proper verbal, behavioral, and mental behaviors. That's why it's important. Okay? We've got to accept the acceptance of the role differences. We've got to practice and embrace and appreciate not only our role, gender role, but the other as well, and see the importance of that particular gender role. Okay? How do we ensure that we survive single parent homes? Is that parents have to put their offspring before themselves. Parents have to put their offspring before themselves. There has to be an air of selflessness by our parents, knowing, number two, that their legacy is important. To build a legacy is critical. And then third, the betterment of community, culture, and clan. We can only better our community, culture, and clan through ourselves, setting an example through our children. Well, that's it. I hope you got something out of that. I hope you got something out of it. It's about how to survive the single parent home and how masculinity can continue to grow and to thrive. I hope you got something out of it. Until next time, please, before I go, please subscribe, like, share, hit this notification bell. Underneath the screen is all our information, our email address, our website. We also have our Twitter address. We also have our Patreon. We ask you to come and be a part of our community. So, all that's there. So until the next time, G Alpha Palmer. Peace.